Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk about art and to talk with Dan about art and science. I find I've been doing art seriously for about 12 years. I'm going to show you some pictures that sort of illustrate the growth of the way in which I do art. I do not try to use science in doing the art, but I find great commonalities between doing art and doing science. The three commonalities I'm most struck by are that both art and science use our creative impulse. We're driven to create new and novel things. And we take a great pleasure in that element of novelty and creation. As another aspect of both science and art, they're both fun. The science we often think of as a search for truth. It involves creating new things that other individuals in the community, other scientists, can agree are new and novel and true. There's a social aspect of science that dominates the way in which we do science, but the individual doing science is generally driven by the search, the creative drive, and the search for something new. In art, there isn't an agreed upon social structure that then can approve and say this is true art or not. So in some ways, one is freer in doing the art than the science. In both cases, though, the drive is to create something, in the case of science, something that one strikes one as truthful. In the case of art, something that strikes one as beautiful. And what I've attempted to do in doing art is to look for that thing that is beautiful. I began doing art seriously about 12 years ago. I had used the camera throughout my life, both as a child doing wet photography, as an adult using first film cameras and then digital cameras as they came in. But about 12 years ago, I discovered I could make large images from a small camera. The digital cameras in those days were 2 megapixel cameras, and one was generally told you could make postcard-sized pictures from them. This is one of the early images. It's a boat in Egypt, and I discovered I could make a 4 by 6 foot image, and it was a very, very pleasant thing. Another early image is this image of doors taken in a museum in Madrid. The images I take are generally framed in the camera. In this case, I'm walking in the museum and I look down a hallway and I see this and I take a picture, and that's the result. And in this case, these are actually the colors on the walls which had just been painted. I discovered very early that I loved to use the programs in the computer as an experimental device. I would take a picture, put it in Photoshop, and then transform it considerably. In this case, the colors have been wildly transformed in Photoshop to make new things. And what I actually do, I treat the computer as my experimental tool, and I play with it to see what new things can come out of it. I consider myself an experimental artist, rather than a theoretical one. I'm nearly not working with a conception as such, but I am working with the material and the image, but as I said, held in the computer. I photographed here graffiti. Here's a photograph, an early photograph of a marzipan tangerine. It's from Italy. The Italians love, in Sicily, love candy made in the shape of fruits, and this is entirely, it's a synthetic, it's both a picture of a copy of something which is not really true. I went to Poland and I did a big installation there of images of machines, and a lot of the work that I did in the period from about 2006, 2007, which is when this was, is of sort of fragments of the world. And so here are some other pictures from that period. Here's again a large machine with a little, since it's a picture taken in an ancient decaying factory, there's a cobweb in it. There's a picture just of grease on a surface. This is a picture of the installation. These were 8-foot by 12-foot hangings, and people wandered around the ancient factory around the hangings. I then photographed, again, fragments of the world. This is a little fragment of a farm in Orkney. This is a picture of cheese from Poland. What I'm striving for here is both the feeling of the textures, the three-dimensional structure, and the joy that I just take in the coloration in the image. A decaying boat in Orkney. I photographed the Boston Ballet in rehearsal for several years. It produced a set of beautiful pictures of ballet dancers in action. This is from a ballet called Serenade. Here is a dancer leaping. Here's a picture, a scene from a Stravinsky ballet, La Noce. These were all taken this was actually taken in the dress rehearsal. Here is a ballet dancer just waiting in the rehearsal room, waiting to go on. But I found getting permission to use the photographs of people fantastically frustrating. Everybody in the company, the artistic director, the pictures I showed you appeared in a book on the Boston Ballet, co-authored with Christine Temin. I had to get everybody's permission to use the photographs, the company director, the company people, the ballet dancer finally themselves, and I had lots of pictures which I couldn't use. So I turned to making abstracts from them and discovered that I liked the abstracts very much. Here's another abstract silhouette. Here's another composed picture. I then discovered I took the head of this ballet dancer and made a total abstract from it. This is actually an 8-foot by 10-foot object. I took the outline of the head and shrank it as a line and shrank it over and over again and superimposed it to make this pattern that I call vanishing. And then I discovered I fell in love with all those textures. And so here's another picture that I call Four Faces. It's in fact little fragments of the face of that earlier image. I could, in working with those textures, here's another little fragment. This is the back of that head. But in this case, I've taken the black and white image and created colors by overlapping the image with itself in several different colors. There's a feature of this image. The original image is not composed by a mathematical formula. It's composed by actually shrinking the profile by hand over and over again and building up the image in the computer. And the result of that is there are very slight inhomogeneities in the image. And that produces an image that has a lively character, which it would not have had it been done completely by design. I kept on playing with these images more and more complex ways. And this is another image in that I call green fluttering. All of these images have repeating structure, and they have a curve that I call, it's related to the outline of the original face. I call it a biological line. After doing that, I decided to go more abstract and say, well, let's not use a biological curve, let's use a geometric curve. And so I took a square and made an image I call vanishing squares. It's made by hand again by taking the image, by taking a square line, shrinking it, superimposing it in alternating colors, taking that image after it's finally composed, superimposing it again and again. And that made seriously more complicated images. And I began to explore just geometric images. For a period of about a year, I just worked in making geometric images. Here's a very complicated vanishing image. The original image as a 4 by 6 foot image would be one that you just stare and go down and down and down into. I then played with triangles. And again, superimposed images of triangles by hand, first in black and white, and then colored them in the computer. Another image of triangles, still another one. And then I turned to straight lines and made images based just on lines. Here's an image based just on 4 lines and a little light. And again, taking that same structure, coloring it in the computer, I created these images like this. And then took that last image and made something entirely different from it. Because in the computer I have access to what you might call the input-output function. I can change any particular color and shade pattern to another one. And that's the way this image is created. And that series ended up with just pure lines. In the several years after that, I began first to play in black and white. And so I'm going to show you several black and white images. An abstract piece of architecture. I have a whole series of images of water towers in New York. In this case, the image has been changed again in the computer. You can see that originally there's a photograph of water towers, but something has happened to it. In still photography, that would be called solarization. You would take the paper that had been exposed, and in the process of developing it, you would flash light on it and get a reversal of some of the tones. Again, you can effectively do this in the computer in a whole variety of ways, some of which work and some of which don't. But I've changed some of the lights and the darks and made this quite strange image. And here's another black and white image of chimneys in Boston. The other thing I do with these images, these photographs, is generally take them in the computer and transform them again in color to intensify the colors tremendously. And that black and white picture has a colored counterpart like this, which again, unnatural colors, but I think something that's very effective in which the colors have been essentially blown out entirely. And this is another version of that water tower I showed you, but now this is actually the original picture was in color. This is the first transformation, or a transformation of that picture in color, and the result is the wooden water towers look as though they're copper. Here's a red wall from Paris. Here's a scene that I call Dawn in Paris. Again, a picture in which I find very pleasing just because the colors have been so wildly intensified. Recent years I've taken, again, the photographing things, but then again, continuing this process of taking the colors to a full saturation. There's a picture I call A View from Heaven. It's basically an abstract, although it's based on a hanging silk in the Museum of Modern Art. The most recent work I've done of these last pictures I'm about to show you are the transformations of an underlying image of skylights. And that image has been taken, the colors intensified, and then the structure built up to make what are very complex but very abstract images. And they have abstract names like transformation or red. Transformation number 3. I'm going to have open studios. If anyone wants to actually see some of the images, I'm actually doing it open studios the first weekend of May, the 3rd and 4th of May, from 2 to 6 at Brick Bottom. My studio is room 319 at Brick Bottom, which is 1 Fitchburg Street in Somerville. That weekend, there's actually open studios throughout Somerville. And they have cards in the back that have my contact on them. So thank you very much.
Let me start by saying that this is a great pleasure for me to do this with Wally. Wally and I have known each other for 30 years, and he was my mentor in many ways, although not in art. But he helped me write my first major paper, and I remember bringing this manuscript into his office, and he read it, and he says, "It needs work." But he spent the entire afternoon with me, I remember that. So I'm going to tell you today about some of the art we've been doing, and particularly with the theme of combining art and science. And I call it alchemy. Obviously, a play on the name alchemy, which I guess is kind of in disrepute, but that's okay. And the idea here is using some of the combination of my chemical understanding or scientific understanding with an artist's eye. So I'll start off with, I'll put in various quotes in here, and I think Wally introduced this idea, but there is a commonality of artists and scientists. Both take unknowns and work with it, both experiment, both love the creative process. In a way, both create a tangible universe. The scientist is constrained by nature in trying to make a tangible universe theoretically that conforms to what nature tells us. Artists have, again, as Wally pointed out, a little bit more freedom, but all in all, artists also create a consistent, tangible form of nature. And I think both artists and scientists inform us about nature and our relationship to it. And so this is from David Rothenberg's recent book on survival of the beautiful. I'm not going to read the quotes. I presume everyone reads here. This is Cambridge. So my own personal history was a little, I guess, unique in that I know a lot of people who do one or the other and then maybe play at the one, but I've really tried to do art and science seriously for about 30 years. I had my first solo show in 1986, but the thing is, I've actually siloed the two, kept them very separate for many years, and this is just an example of several of them over the years. Am I going to do this right? These are some early works from the late 80s and early 90s. All these have either been in shows or have sold, and these are some plein air drawings done in marketplaces in Korea or in the Place Comédie in Montpellier, a Kyoto fish market, some figure drawing, which I've done religiously every Sunday morning for 25 years. But I think the reason I'm showing this is really this idea that none of this work really says anything about science. And I think there was a very conscious effort over the years to say, well, I had my scientific career and my art career, and the two should never meet. I attended a workshop at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown last August, and one of the things I thought it was on experimental drawing or mark making. It was led by Paul Stopforth. And one of the things I thought I could bring to this was using my science in artistic ways. And it led to me lugging a 4-liter flask of liquid nitrogen down to this workshop in my car, in the backseat of my car, to do these liquid nitrogen drawings. And they began and catalyzed a whole series of experimental drawings that I've done over the last 6 months, which basically, as I said, use my chemical knowledge, use my understanding of scientific, of the science, but the chemical reactions, how media interacts with it, and to hopefully make new marks and interesting images that are not otherwise easily attainable on paper. So, liquid nitrogen drawings. As I said, I did it at the Fine Arts Work Center. The idea here was that by throwing liquid nitrogen on paper, which cools everything down to whatever, it's minus 191 degrees Celsius, basically you're causing physical and chemical changes to the environment of that paper, and particularly how media would interact with that paper. So one is supercooling, but in addition to that, once the liquid nitrogen dissipates into the air and warms up, there's rapid rewarming, and to some extent that causes explosive effects because you've frozen whatever drawing or other media you've got, paint or whatever, around liquid nitrogen, and when that expands, those particles explode. The other thing that happens is that because liquid nitrogen is a non-wettable liquid, things will flow in it. So you'll get these waves, these veils of patterned color. I was invited to write all this up as a scholarly article for the journal Impact. There's a couple or 20 copies at the back of the room if anyone's interested in reading it. Anyway, I'll show you some of those examples and show you some videos of the making of it. This is the first one that I did, which was liquid nitrogen with charcoal powder mixed with glue and water thrown onto the paper. And I'll show you a quick video of that. If I can get this to work. So, the music is Stravinsky's, not mine. So basically, this is 4-liter flask. I'm pouring this in. I'm throwing this media down. And if you think about it, there's a lot of abstract expressionist technique in this. One is looking for fortuitous accidents of interactions. But I don't think you can hear it, but if anyone hear a crackle and a pop, that's because you could hear the explosions of the little things. And that's the image that comes out. What we see here, what we saw there was dark areas with that were the sort of charcoal powder, but the sort of explosion off of it, and also these thin veils, as I said, that would flow with the liquid nitrogen. Okay, this is vermilion paint, of acrylic paint, and has been worked with several other things like calligraphy cutouts and figures that I made from calligraphies that I drew as many years ago. I'm going to skip that one due to time. So this led to a whole series of, while I was still at Fine Arts Work Center, of could I begin to play with some of the other chemical elements in there. There's the wonderful hardware store that's very close to this place, the Marine Hardware Store, if anyone's an artist and goes there. And I bought copper wire and carpenter's chalk and other things. And so the very first work that I did combined these elements for those chemists in the audience. For the non-chemists, these are the chemical symbols for cobalt, copper, calcium, and carbon. So in other words, this work was made out of those various media, and that's what it looks like. That's what the final work looks like. And if I show the making of that, points for anyone who recognizes the music. So the first one is just laying down, and in this case it's pouring Japanese Sumi ink down on the surface, but the second stage of this is actually drawing into the liquid nitrogen with charcoal. What I'm pouring from there is my grinding stone, which I ground the ink with. So with a helper here, Jerry Tootin, she's pouring this thing so it's basically filled. I'm putting a gloved coated hand and drawing those little clay sculptures that I'd made earlier in the day from that. So the two things that happen there is the surface freezes, so the frictional coefficient on the paper is low, so you'll hit areas in which you just slide. The other thing that happens is the nervous energy that I put into it for the fear of losing my hand, I think adds a little bit to the power of it, I think. So that's the drawing, and that's what eventually comes out from it. Okay, so that then led to the idea, could I use other sort of chemicals or other things that aren't normally used for art media, and again follow this theme of the chemical elements. In this case, it's aluminum, gold, and silver. Silver and gold. And what we see here, this sort of big gray mass that kind of looks like a phoenix, is actually an explosion in liquid nitrogen of silver nitrate that when you lay it down is perfectly transparent, but of course with the sun darkens. That's the major pigment in black and white photographic film. And this is then enhanced by gold leaf and shredded aluminum foil. This is let's see, boron, barium, beryllium, bismuth, and bromine. So there are various things that we use sometimes in our day-to-day lives. If you look closely, so it's obviously a very abstract image, but if you look closely, you might be able to make out a drawing here of a digestive tract. Here's the stomach, here's the small intestine, the large intestine around here. I had an ulcer when I was 16, and the drawing is actually made with the barium sulfate that one drinks for x-rays of the stomach. There's these little X kind of things are made out of Pepto-Bismol. You can't tell the pink in this. And there's other things that also make this up. But the bottom line is it uses these, obviously, B elements to make this abstract image, but with a little bit of autobiography to it. This is the S elements, so silicon, sulfur, tin, and antimony for the people who haven't had chemistry in a while. The little sort of wavelets are actually tin and antimony solder, and they've been pounded to make a wave-like effect. The yellow things here are pure sulfur, which have been embedded in liquid acrylic and then cut out into sort of very organic shapes. The sand, I think, is obviously, and the pink stuff is the fiberglass that you insulate your home with, also made from silicon. So it gives you a sense of, I guess it was evoking the sea, but again, a very abstract image. This one is less abstract, and it involves iron and fluorine. This is a figure drawn with steel wool rusted in vinegar and then just dipped in and used as my brush to draw this major figure here. The other parts that are made out of iron are iron filings, steel wool, and bits of a rusted bridge that's collapsing near my home that have been actually held together by magnets underneath to create these sort of magnetic fields. And then the fluorine is represented by two things. One is this, can you see this little green figure there? That's a little Buddha figure made out of fluorite, a mineral, a green mineral, which has been crushed and formed into this little sculpture. And the white sort of wave light lines projecting from the Buddha are a fluoridated toothpaste. So, I took the iron theme a little bit further and just worked with a single element, in this case iron and the magnetic fields, because I like the effect of that work. And there are so many forms of iron that we have in our world that one could do a whole bunch of interesting things with them. And I like the fact that you could visualize these invisible magnetic fields with these bits of iron and then fix them in place with acrylic. These field lines actually project into the third dimension, which won't be so obvious from the photos, but you'll get a general sense of it. So this one, again, has bits of rust. I think this is an old muffler. And then you see the nice patterns of the magnetic fields projecting behind different magnets that form this sort of geometric type abstraction. But again, there's the dynamism of the magnetic field behind it. This one is, again, I think it's a similar idea, but again, different sets of magnets, a little bit more flow with liquid acrylic. So this is basically poured in like an abstract expressionist would paint with, but in this case with iron filings, sometimes using the magnetic fields to hold these things in place, sometimes just allowing them to flow across the field. And then a third one. This one's actually made from a pipe fitter's steel shavings. He happened to be working at the tea station and gave me his old bucket full of these shavings. But you can see this wonderful organic shape that's come from them. So not only you get these curls of steel, the iron filings latch onto them because of the magnets underneath. And this projects very much into the third dimension. So a little bit hard to see. How am I doing for time, Deborah?
You're doing very well. We have 5 minutes.
Terrific. Okay, the last set are some recent works that I've been doing, which actually involve, so far I've talked mostly about physical interactions. These are real chemistry experiments or chemical reactions that are going on. And this is with silver nitrate and salt. When silver nitrate meets sodium chloride, silver chloride precipitates out. Silver chloride is the major component of photographic film, and that's the little particles that you have on the film that turn dark with sunlight. Another interesting aspect of this, this is a reaction of solid silver nitrate crystals and big rock salt from this terrible winter we've been having, thrown onto wet watercolor paper, letting them diffuse toward each other, and then when they meet, they precipitate out. An additional thing I've done with this one is to add food coloring dyes to the rock salt crystals. The reason to do that is that those dyes, when they bind to the silver chloride to precipitate out, changes the color from a turquoise to a lilac color. And that's because when it binds to this precipitate, the photochemistry is a little bit different so that you get a different color that comes out. That's actually the basis of color photography. And that what we have in color photography in the old days is 3 separate layers, each of which has silver chloride or silver halide coated with a different organic dye to give the 3 different colors. So when one does that in a more abstract way, you get the following. And so what we see here are these, and again, this projects very much in the third dimension. You get these wonderful crystals of very, very organic looking crystals of the silver chloride, and they have a sort of a purplish color compared to the sort of turquoise color of the background. In addition to that, the salt that does not react with the silver, when this paper dries, forms wonderful little flat diamond-like crystals, which you can't really make out here. But this whole surface just glows in the sunlight from the crystals that spread across this thing. So you get many wonderful colors and textures from this. Obviously, very abstract, but by the same. But there's I think there's a wonderful dynamic play of these things, again, taking advantage of the fortuitous accident, but then also using a bit of artist's eye in experimenting and choosing where to lay down my silver nitrate and where to put my rock salt crystals, but then allowing the nature to take over from there. Okay, let me close. So what do we think about here? So I love this idea of scientists who make art. We have been for so long as a society segregating ourselves into our different disciplines, and I think only in the last few years has there been a move toward at least interdisciplinary work. Work at the interface has really been more exciting. But what I'm thinking of here is not so much interdisciplinary as transdisciplinary, and by that I mean actually not just borrowing one technology from one field and moving it to another, but really integrating the two fields and the thinking of them. So it's a rather challenging thing, but having done. The Hindus have an interesting way to think about this. There's 4 stages of life. The first stage is your student and training. Your second stage is you have your career and your family. The third stage is when you begin to ask if there's something more. How do you serve your community, etc. So I'm comfortably ensconced in the third stage. Fourth stage is preparing for death. I'm not ready for that. But for the third stage, for me, I think what my unique talents is thinking seriously about both for 30 years. And so by combining the two, I hope that may lead to some new things, and I'm trying to encourage other people to come into that. I think this is a very fertile crowd to do that, because I know we have scientists and artists in this crowd, and at least both are sympathetic to the other side. So there are resources, some of which are meetings like this one that Deborah's been so wonderful about organizing. In New York, there's a series called Entertaining Science at the Cornelia Cafe that Raoul Hoffman, the Nobel Prize-winning chemist, has been running for about a decade. There are publications. Impact is the journal that I published in, and the copy is at the back of the room, as I said. Leonardo is another well-known one that, again, thinks about interdisciplinary work between art and science. The issues I've read of that really tend to be more of that interdisciplinary as opposed to transdisciplinary, but still I think it's a very useful resource. The books, the Rothenberg book I quoted at the beginning, Marge Livingston, who actually gave the presentation here 2 months ago, is a neuroscientist who thinks about how neuroscience dictates art and art appreciation. Eric Kandel has published a lovely book called The Age of Insight, which is he comes from a psychiatry background originally, but is best known for his work in learning and memory. And he has taken his birth town of Vienna at not the turn of the century, he's not that old, but the idea of the cultural flowering that occurred there was a combination of psychiatry and neuroscience that came from the psychiatry, but as well as the wonderful art that came from that period, and he's got a lovely book about that. So what do we do as a society? Well, we organize and communicate things like Catalyst Conversations. We increase awareness, perhaps through colleges and art schools. I would love to see much more conversation between artists and scientists at a much younger stage. And one primary place that I think that could happen very well at is Cooper Union, because they have a very strong engineering school and a very strong art school. And finally, make and show good work. And I think that's critical for any quote-unquote revolution to succeed. I'll close with a quote from Hoffman, who did a show at the Smithsonian that combined his understanding of chemistry with Vivian Torrance's collages. And it's this idea that they work to meld new knowledge and new observations to change the way we think about nature and how we relate to nature. And he quotes Paul Klee here, so this is a quote of quote, but to make the invisible visible, the unknowable knowable. And I think it's a worthy goal. I'm going to donate the next 25 years of my life to it, and anyone who would like to come along with me, that's great. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Very broadly. So our previous conversations have been mostly between artists and scientists, and we've had a few overlaps, but certainly here we have scientists who are both artists. And one of the people that is both, is Alan Lightman, and he was one of our first conversationalists, and he's amazing. Probably most of you know who he is. So he's a physicist and a novelist. So I'm just going to reiterate, I think, what Dan was just saying, but sort of through the lens of Alan Lightman. And he says that all of the scientists I've known have at least one more quality in common. They do what they do because they love it and because they cannot imagine doing anything else. So you can interject art for artists there. And in a sense, this is the real reason a scientist does science, because a scientist must. Such a compulsion is both a blessing and a burden. A blessing because the creative life in any endeavor is a gift filled with beauty and not given to everyone, and a burden because the call is unrelenting and can drown out the rest of life. So I just think that's a pretty marvelous way of expressing things that you also said. So, and this has come up so many times in the conversations between artists and scientists in Catalyst, which is there's so much of it's like, oh, and that's what I do, and this is how I feel, and this is my passion. And it's just so parallel. And so maybe that's a good way to start. Just pick up on what Dan finished with. So, and also I just want to interject that I don't know if people know the book by Jonah Lehrer called "Proust Was a Neuroscientist." He studied with Kendall, and he wrote a book around that time period, mostly in Vienna and other parts of Europe, of this incredible foment of art and science and how they kind of intersected at that moment. So maybe we're having a moment. So anyway.
Well, the start of Swan's Way, the Remembrance of Things Past, is all about memory, and so it's fitting that you start with that. But I wanted to focus on the passion thing. I think that is, clear, probably for most people in this room, that we're fortunate in that we can pursue a passion. So that's a wonderful thing. So the idea of, and there's a commonality of that, and I think in Wally's case, having done a wonderful scientific career followed by his art career, he's always brought passion to these things, and it's one of the things I've always admired. But going beyond that, I think the other aspect of it is, and you alluded to it earlier, the commonalities of it. There's a lot of commonalities in the thinking, the problem solving, the trying to address, I personally view a blank sheet of watercolor paper the same way as I think about a scientific problem. I think that there are aspects of how do I get this to work? And I think, and you bounce lots of ideas in your head and eventually something works, and you do lots of experiments, and at science and art, many of them don't work. I mean, that's just the nature of it, and then something works and then you exploit that. That's, I guess, how I think about it.
I think it's very true. I think it is completely, saying it's a deeply experimental field, and it's a field in which one is trying to create something, playing with an image. I mean, I play with the image over and over again. Not all of them work. I mean, that's inevitable. I find one of the pleasures of playing on the computer, the fact that I can't wreck the image. The sculptor has a problem. If you actually work with stone, that you may go too far. The oil painter has a problem. If you paint, you may overpaint the image. Of course, some people then erase the entire thing and start over again. Matisse did that very much. You would paint the entire image, decide that it wasn't something you wanted, scrape it all off, and continue painting again. On the computer, I can create an image, play with it, keep every intermediate. And if I go too far, then I can back up, keep that one, go do something else. I find that very freeing that way. And so I'm delighted with the modern technology. I have painted, but I don't necessarily have quite the patience to do that.
So Wally and I chatted the other day about this Matisse, and I wanted to bring that up. There's one painting called The Pink Nude, for which he made 22 photographs over a 6-month period, and they're dated. There was a show, I think, at the Jewish Museum a few years ago about that. And so as a lark, maybe as a teaching tool this summer, what I did was I got copies of all 22 black and whites, and I did every single one of those paintings on the canvas to see how Matisse thought, try to see how Matisse thought, and I think it's wonderfully instructive. So he actually had a model pose every day for 6 months, even though some of the paintings aren't so different, but some of them are markedly different. And you ask yourself at each stage, what are those changes? Why did he do that? And for me, any single one of them, I would have stopped and said, I had a great day. But this is, I'm not Matisse, of course. So, but I think that that's an interesting thing with what you do. One can do that ad infinitum because of the computer, and you don't lose the images, right? It's a very different sense of what this new technology can provide. And that may lend itself well to scientists who are comfortable with computers to do similar things.
Yeah, there is an element in which, in large part, the science connection I find is that I'm just comfortable experimenting with the machine, not feeling I can destroy it or it'll destroy me or anything like that. I'm perfectly confident that I can do something with it, and if it doesn't work, I can erase the entire thing and start something else. The Matisse photographs are actually quite fascinating because he, in fact, had a photographer photograph his work over a period of time as he's developing a picture, in part to be able to show the world that it wasn't something he dashed off, that there was actually a year's thought or 6 months' thought behind that particular painting. And there is always that interesting sort of conflict about, do you do something quickly because it's right there? And photography, of course, lends itself to that because an individual photograph is in the camera in that moment. But in fact, what finally is there is the result of time and thought and something that takes a much longer period to do. Yeah.
I have a question. This is coming out of an interesting email conversation I'm having with one of my graduate students who undergraduated from Yale with a double major in biology and art. And in this, I'm glad you brought up Leonardo. In this month's Leonardo is an article by a New Zealand doctor, now artist, called The Immortalization of Billy Apple. And I won't describe what it's about, but Billy Apple is a New Zealand conceptual artist who worked with the author and did something about cells, which I don't even really pretend to understand. But the guy in the article makes this very interesting claim that the good synthesis of art and science would contribute to both art and to science. And my discussion with my graduate student is that possible?
I suppose I think it's not. I think it is, of course, this thing. What you're doing is very close to a synthesis of art and science, except that the goals of art are an aesthetic image, of which the effect of the image is an emotional impact in the viewer, the receiver, and that's the point of it. It is actually trying to get to you, not through your conceptual processes, but somewhere much deeper in the emotions. And the goals of science are actually something else, a true statement about the world. The true statement about the world can be beautiful. And in fact, as scientists, we often think it is a beautiful thing. And we value that beauty, but that's not the meaning of the statement. And so it's hard to make it, the truth, I would say truth and beauty are related, but they're not the same thing.
So great question. The one thing I read in your question was this idea, do they influence each other? And when I wrote the impact article, the editor said, could you comment on the other direction? And originally I felt the same. This says art has no influence at all on my science, but I don't think it's true. I think both are ways of visualizing, and I think that when I think about the science I do, I'm a very visual scientist. I imagine myself sitting on a protein, watching proteins moving around me, and that's helpful. But but I don't think they necessarily help each other in the way you're saying. But I think for any individual, they'll bring things from one to the other that may help the art may help their science and vice versa. Yeah.
So maybe even by some kind of serendipity, even that it, that you
Yeah.
don't know what's going to sort of.
Or maybe just the phenotype of a certain person and the way they approach things that they feed into each other.
Right.
Yeah, the visual component in science, there is a visual component. That's
Feynman's a
actually
great
very
example.
important.
Yeah.
I have a somewhat related question, which is you made the decision to go to the Fine Arts Work Center to take a class.
Yeah.
But you came to that class with very specific ideas in mind. I don't know if you had discussed that with your teacher or not. But I'm wondering how working with an artist might have changed what you would have done by yourself.
So I think what it was that based on the workshop itself on experimental mark making, I just thought I could bring something scientific to it. But I think I was very teachable at this. That was the point of me being there, and I was in the studio 15 hours a day doing stuff. And I did stuff other than the liquid nitrogen stuff, but that was the kind of thing that I brought that was different. But
can you say something about what came out of it through the classroom, through the teacher, that was a surprise to you?
I guess Paul isn't in the audience. I think there was this wonderful energy that came up from working with a group. This sort of feedback and playing off of each other. It was a wonderful exercise that Paul did. We all did large drawings of some root vegetable around the room, and 15 minutes into this drawing, he says, switch with somebody else. And you'd work with whatever they put down and vice versa. So this became collaborative art all around the room. So you brought what you had to the table, and you sort of either fought with what they had or you collaborated with what they had, and you made interesting new marks that were in some ways collaborative. So that's very different than what this was. Oh, I have a quick plug. I just found out today that all this stuff and some more stuff will be a solo show at Tufts Eijkman Art Center in September. So there's a hand.
So, this is a question for Wally. Do you think you could capture your process in a video game?
In a video game.
You make it into a video game.
It is a video game. But it's it's a strange element because I view playing a game as an element in which you're following rules through. The goals are set externally in the game. And the process by which I create art, although it's again the same, could be a set of manipulations, the goals are not set in advance. And they're not settable in advance. I'm trying to get something which is not seen before. And that's the element that you can't get to in a game unless you put into the game random elements, at which point it's hard to call it a game.
So my question is about peer review. In science, your colleagues have some sort of objective or quasi-objective opinion about your work, but how do you deal with the opinions of people about your art? And do you see this influencing what you want to make?
Sorry, say that again?
Does this influence what you want to make?
I think we both should probably answer that. I don't consider peer review, let me actually go back one stage. I don't actually consider peer review the synchronon of scientific truth. It's one of those annoying aspects when you publish. But the actual synchronon is the experimental reproduction. We've all seen there are lots of papers that appear which have been reviewed and are wrong. But we're actually interested in those things which are right, which somebody else can actually then do again and duplicate. But that's, as I said, in terms of the art, you are trying to do something which people will react to. It's very hard to sort of, if people react, as a practical matter, if people react to it and buy it, you think that's a great thing. If they don't, well, you keep it, hope that somebody else likes it. Very hard to predict what people will like. I find it hard to predict what people will like. I do art that I like, and I use that as my guide. But do you want to comment?
So for peer review for both, the first thing I do is cry. then I get over it. So I think Wally's got some great points there, that it isn't, for neither one is it the sine qua non. It is, it's, the second part of your question was how much does it influence what you do? Certainly with science, unfortunately, grant funding does influence what we do. Wally and I are both in the fortunate position that we do not have to pay rent with selling our work, but still it's a nice thing to do, to show, to sell, and I think, but we're both in a position where we can do the art that we want to do, and sell as we can. And I think that for me, it's really art, and actually to some extent science, the actual doing of science. They're both about being in the moment. They're both about that physical process as opposed to product. I mean, there's a product that can be sold in art or can be published in science, but I really think the joy, the passion really is about the doing.
It's in the creating of it.
Creating, exactly.
There's Feynman describes, discovering something and having that moment of, I know something that nobody else in the world knows. And when you create an image or you do something in art, when you've done it and you have done something new, and you can look at it and say, it's new, it's different, and that the joy is in that.
I want to circle back, if I could, at the risk of beating this into the ground, to something I think Wally Gilbert just said. Very early on, we distinguished between art as beautiful and science as truthful. Is that fair? I question that dichotomy, and I think of Goya's etchings. And then related to that is that comment up there by Paul Klee about we set out to make the invisible visible and the unknowable knowable. First of all, who is we? And second of all, which invisibles are we trying to make visible, and which unknowables are we, whoever we are we trying to make knowable? I think it's a hell of a lot fuzzier than this split. God only knows I'm not a scientist, I'm not an artist. I talk. So if you could maybe revisit that a little bit and perhaps delve into it a little bit more, and again, as I said, try to unpack what Clay is saying. I think it's a reductive statement. It's an easy enough thing to sort of put forth. Yeah, we're all one, kumbaya, let's go home.
Yeah.
Hope not.
I kind of agree with you. I'm a strong believer in ugly art, powerful, truthful art that doesn't have to be beautiful. One of my mentors once told me I couldn't make an ugly drawing if I tried, but I really challenged him on that.
That also gets into definitions of what is beautiful.
Right. So I think there's the Goya example you gave is a great one. Those are they are beautiful. They are beautiful etchings. Exactly. So and the emotion of it is ugly. Yes, but he depicts that. They're very strong.
Although, it goes back to, you can look at those etchings as reportage, truth about the world. But the actual effect of the etching is something else, and the effect of the etching is in the emotion it gets to in you.
But that emotion could turn into action.
That's a different question.
Which then becomes something else.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we will continue a more informal conversation with the back.
I'm curious to know what you both think about the advantages to having students from elementary all the way through graduate school exposed to art classes as a way of helping them with problem solving, recognition, and observation skills.
I suppose I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
The danger is it stultifies this. It's ideal to be exposed to an art class which stimulates the child or the student to do something themselves and to feel the joy of creating something. And it's very dangerous that, you can destroy that impulse by turning it into a class. And turning it into a school effort or something.
Yeah, so I think art education is a great thing. Art teachers, bless their hearts, can vary widely in quality or instruction, and I think all children are born great artists, and they lose that. There's an age of about 12 or 13 where all of a sudden art is something that looks like a comic book drawing, and I can't draw like that because I don't have the technical skills, and we lose most people who don't become artists at that time. But prior to that age, children have a wonderful natural sense of composition, of color, of interaction. They know when a work is finished. I still debate every piece I do, but they know this is done, and they lose it. And why they lose it, there's lots of reasons. They develop language, they other ways to communicate, they play baseball, whatever the case may be. But if we had, the do no harm approach of art instruction in this through all the way through, it would be wonderful.
Well, that's an amazing place to stop, because I want to tell you about our next Catalyst Conversations is going to be a big conversation about STEAM education, which is this development people are talking about and interested in integrating arts education into science, technology, engineering, and math. And anyway, that's going to be May 6th at the Bartos Theater at the List. I just want to thank both of you for great presentations and conversations to everybody. And we have refreshments in the back, so thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you.